Merriam-Webster defines folklore as traditional customs, tales, sayings, dances, or art forms preserved among a people. Also as an often unsupported notion, story, or saying that is widely circulated. The currently accepted popular definition of folklore includes everything from the email forwarding chains of the new millennium to meme sharing of today. But if you ask most people what they consider folklore, it's often old stories, many times spooky, often told as a cautionary tale or with a moral lesson attached. Don't believe it? Ask yourself and answer honestly. Somewhere nearby, just down the road near that place you used to hang out, is there a story about a lady in white? It probably takes place in a rural area, with an attached story of tragedy most likely. It's a pretty common folklore, and despite what your Aunt Tammy told you, it did not happen in the next town over. How about a creature, a lake monster, or maybe a Bigfoot-like cryptid? Of course, folklore doesn't have to be a monster or a ghost. It can be a campfire tale about a lover's lane killer, or the well-known tales of Paul Bunyan. Regardless of where you are as you listen to this, there is some folklore just around the corner from you. It surrounds all of us, and it doesn't fade easily because it captivates. Folklore is sticky. We don't always know the truth about where a particular bit of folklore starts, but we don't have to. Time will tell, and the truth is, good stories have legs. And if it's a good story you want, well, get comfortable. Maybe even turn out the lights, light some candles, and let me tell you about the night parents kept their kids home from trick-or-treating because of monsters in Illinois. This is the story of the Enfield Monster. "1973 was the year that the Miami Dolphins completed the only perfect season in NFL history. The war in Vietnam ended, and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon was released. Denim and knits were big fashion statements. The hippie look was very in, and in Illinois, monsters were in the news. Really. Over a span of about 6 months, residents of Illinois, in and near the communities of Murphysboro, Mount Vernon, and Edwardsville, reported sightings of a monster. Locals gave the creature a number of colorful monikers, depending on where it was seen. The Big Muddy Monster, the Murphysboro Monster, the Pumphouse Monster. Perhaps today it's best known by the name it was given earlier that year, in April, when it was reported down the road in Enfield, Illinois, the Enfield Monster. Just a note, this is not to be confused with the Enfield Horror, which the movie The Conjuring 2 was based on. The Enfield Horror story is also interesting, but that's a different story for a different day. In 1973, Enfield, Illinois was a tiny town of about 750 residents. On the night of April 25th, 1973, Henry McDaniel, one of the 750 residents, reported he had just come home from a meeting when he heard something scratching at his front door. McDaniel went to the door and saw what he initially thought was a bear. It was trying to get in the house, he recalled. McDaniel ran to his bedroom to retrieve a flashlight and pistol, and when he returned, he saw the creature in his yard. It had 3 legs on it, McDaniel said, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 to 5 feet tall and was grayish colored. McDaniel said he fired 4 shots at it. He later told Dennis Montgomery from the Associated Press, "When I fired that first shot, I know I hit it." McDaniel claimed it hissed like a wildcat and covered 50 feet in 3 jumps, then disappeared into some brush along the railroad tracks behind his home. McDaniel called the authorities, and a responding trooper from the state police, James Masser, said McDaniel appeared rational and sober. McDaniel later told a reporter, "If they do find it, they will find more than one, and they won't be from this planet, I can tell you that." The men investigated and found no sign of the monster, but McDaniel told the Mount Vernon Register that they found tracks in the soft ground outside his home. McDaniel described them as looking like a dog's footprint, except with 6 toes. A creature with 3 legs and 6 toes on each foot? let's retreat to science for a moment. The only three-legged animal that you have a chance of running into is usually a dog, who heroically survived a battle with either cancer or a car. There are no known three-legged animals. Also, every land vertebrate that we know of has 5 toes maximum, unless it's some kind of aberrant mutation or something. The Register story, published 2 days after McDaniel's sighting, makes mention of one other thing without much context. Quote, McDaniel said he was sure it wasn't a dog and was positive it wasn't a kangaroo because he said he once had a pet kangaroo while he was serving with the army in Australia. Unquote. When you read the contemporaneous press coverage of Henry McDaniel's account, there is a subtle but ever-present literary smirk apparent in many of the stories. In a town as small as Enfield, everybody knew Henry, and his credibility was dubious. And if Henry McDaniel's account of the monster was the first, your skepticism would be understandable. The townsfolk were. A waitress at the Echo Cafe and Motel told a reporter, "I hate to dispute somebody's word on that, but I doubt it." On May 6th, Henry McDaniel called radio station WWKI and reported he had seen the monster again, in the dark of early morning, silhouetted against the sky as it negotiated a nearby railroad trestle. That night, WWKI news director Rick Rainbow went to Enfield accompanied by a radio station client, a man named Ed Phillips. According to Henry McDaniel, Phillips was also an avid big game hunter and brought a veritable arsenal of tranquilizer guns and other specialized weapons. The men were reportedly in town for 2 days and claimed to have seen the creature in an abandoned building near McDaniel's home. Rainbow even claimed to have captured a recording of the creature's wail, but on May 8th, things came to a head. On a report of gunshots, White County Sheriff's deputies arrested 5 men, all from out of town, all under the age of 20. Initially, the men were reported to be in town to hunt the monster. 2 of the men said that they saw a gray, hairy creature streaking into the underbrush and that it moved faster than a man. 4 of them fired at it, and 2 of them claimed that they had hit it. White County Deputy Sheriff Jim Clark stated, "Nothing I know of is in season now, especially monsters. Anybody we know of out hunting monsters, especially with guns, will be put in jail. We're afraid they'll kill somebody." Rick Rainbow's monster hunt radio stunt quickly came to an end after the arrest, and the sheriff's department later played down the monster hunt arrest as just some good old boys having a good time with a few too many barley pops. By May 16th of 1973, a man named Alan Yorkshire of Elyria, Ohio, wrote a letter to the newspaper in Enfield. The problem? There was no newspaper in Enfield. So City Treasurer Murtis Fields opened the letter and reported the contents back to the police. Yorkshire believed that the Enfield Monster was his kangaroo, Macy, who had either escaped or been stolen. He offered a $500 reward for the animal's safe return and announced plans to visit the city to search for it, but we were unable to find anything on whether or not he ever found his pet. About 6 weeks later and 70 miles to the southwest, Randy Needham and Judy Johnson were about to have a terrifying encounter at the Lindell Street boat ramp in Murfreesboro. It was June 25th, 1973. According to a City of Murfreesboro police report, 19-year-old Randy Needham arrived in person at the Murfreesboro Police Department with a wild story to tell. Needham said that he and his girlfriend, Judy Johnson, had been parked by the boat ramp when Randy saw an unknown creature north of the Big Muddy River. Officers Nash and Lindsay responded to the scene, and Randy Needham and Judy Johnson met them there. While there, the youths explained what they had experienced. Quoting from the report, "Complainant was parked on the south side of the parking area next to the woods. Complainant heard a loud screaming sound in the wooded area and observed a large creature approximately 7 feet tall. The creature appeared to have light-colored hair, matted with mud. The creature appeared to be walking on 2 legs and was proceeding toward his car. The creature continued the screaming, changing tones and proceeding toward the car. Complainant then left the area and came to MPD. When questioned further, Judy Johnson admitted that she heard the monster's cry but did not see it since she was inside the car and it was very dark outside. However, both Judy and Randy agreed that no human would be able to make a howl as loud as the one that they had heard. Needham and the officers investigated near the riverbank and found 12-inch tracks in the mud from feet that had sunk 3 to 4 inches into the muck, sometimes 3 feet apart. The investigating officers left the scene to get boots which would allow them to investigate more thoroughly, and returned with Deputy Sheriff Scott and Randy Needham. They found more tracks, and while Officer Lindsay returned to his squad car to get a camera to photograph the tracks, Scott, Patrolman Nash, and Randy Needham bent over to examine a track in the mud. Just then, an ear-splitting scream pierced the night air. Again, quoting from the report. While officers and complainant were bent over some of the tracks inspecting them, a loud shrill sound came from the wooded area to the southeast near the river and seemed to be approximately 100 yards away. Needham immediately stated that that was the creature. Officer Nash would later say, "I was leaning over when there was the most incredible shriek I have ever heard. It was in those bushes. That was no bobcat or screech owl, and we hightailed it out of there." From the report, Officer Nash, Deputy Scott, and Needham retreated out of the wooded area and back to the squad car, and advised Officer Lindsay what had occurred, and requested Sergeant Teacher to come to the scene to photograph the tracks. The next night, June 26, 1973, 4-year-old Christian Burrill had been chasing fireflies in the backyard when he came running inside. "Daddy, Daddy," he said, "there's a big ghost out back." Christian's parents did not think anything of his comment and brushed it off. 10 minutes later at the Ray family's neighboring property, Cheryl Ray and her boyfriend, Randy Creeth, would have an encounter. From a City of Murphysboro police report, upon arrival, officers were met by Cheryl A. Ray and Randy E. Creeth, which gave them the following account of what had occurred. Randy and Cheryl were sitting on the patio talking when they observed something moving around a patch of small trees in the field behind 37 Westwood Lane. Both Randy and Cheryl watched and observed a large creature walk out of the patch of trees near the edge of the yard and then turn around and walk back into the field. The creature was described as 7 to 8 feet tall, weighing 300 to 350 pounds, pale dirty white or cream colored, and standing on 2 feet. Creeth stated that he walked toward it, and he got approximately 30 to 40 feet from it. Creeth also stated that it had a musky odor to it. The police report goes on to detail how a private tracker dog, a 90-pound German Shepherd named Reb, was brought in to track the creature, and the dog followed the monster's scent, hesitating to sniff the surroundings whenever it detected a black slime that the creature had left behind. Reb tracked the scent to an abandoned barn. The dog's handler called Officer Nash to the scene because the dog would not enter the barn, which was very unusual. The dog was trained to search buildings and had never been known to refuse to enter one. The handler pushed the dog inside the barn door, and the dog ran right back out. Eventually, officers searched the barn themselves, and nothing was found, but it was still a very strange event. About 1 week later, on July 2nd, in Mount Vernon, Illinois, northeast of Murphysboro and northwest of Enfield, 6 teenagers and a 24-year-old man reported seeing the Pumphouse Monster in the wooded areas around Casey Fork Creek. 2 of the teenagers were on Toll Road when they saw the creature step out of the brush and into the road. It was described as about 6 feet 2 inches tall with beady eyes and a flat nose. From the chest up, the creature was bald, but its lower body was covered with hair. The boys said it scared them to death, and their dog too. Sightings of creatures and monsters continued around Illinois all summer, and Burt Miller, owner of the Miller Carnival, reported on July 7, 1973, that several of his carnival workers had seen a monster. The workers reported twice finding an ape-like creature standing near the carnival's ponies, which were tied up in a grassy area behind the carnival trucks. The creature appeared to be interested in the ponies, and each time they spotted the creature, a worker would run to get the boss only to find the monster gone when they returned. Miller said he had initially been reluctant to report the sightings for fear it would keep people away from his carnival. Sightings continued into the fall, and the Winona Daily News reported on November 8th, "It is a creature that has brought a real kind of Halloween to Murfreesboro's 10,000 citizens. And although the hobgoblin is so far benevolent, no one here is taking any chances. Many have armed themselves, and a good number of God-fearing families decided to curtail traditional trick-or-treating rounds." They canceled trick-or-treating in Murfreesboro because of an alleged monster. Guess there's a first time for everything. The eyewitness accounts from the early Murfreesboro encounters have left many to question whether the reports are even related to the Enfield Monster, since the Murfreesboro sightings seem to be more of a Bigfoot-type humanoid than a three-legged kangaroo monster. And maybe that's the point. Whatever was happening around Illinois in 1973, it was happening a lot, over a wide area, and each person seemed to have their own unique experience. Some saw an anthropoid Bigfoot-like ape or primate. Some saw a giant three-legged monster that others labeled an escaped kangaroo. And the Pumphouse Monster sounded a lot like a giant rat. The description of the creature is not what people's accounts have in common. The description of people is what the creature accounts have in common. That's after the break. Beyond 1973, sightings of the monsters of central and southern Illinois continued on occasion, including a well-publicized sighting by Ricky Kells, David Taylor, and Russell Ward on June 19, 1976. Just a few years later, Western Illinois University published a study on social contagion as it relates to the Enfield Monster. Social contagion being the currently accepted terminology for what we used to pejoratively refer to as mass hysteria. Social contagion is an assumption that, under certain conditions, widespread masses of people rapidly and unanimously adopt patterns of behavior that are intense, unwitting, and non-rational. Social contagion, or mass hysteria, is interesting because it's a conclusion that frequently forces eyewitnesses to choose between insisting that their hard-to-believe account is true or admitting that they've been swept up in nonsensical hysteria. Just like a rube taken in a street corner pigeon drop, nobody wants to admit that they've been fooled, or even worse, caught up in the hijinks to the degree that they not only witnessed events, but are now participating in the reports. If you witnessed a UFO in the sky last night, and you were certain you saw a UFO, would you readily admit that you were wrong when the sighting is plausibly explained today? What if you already told all your friends what you saw? What if a person slightly exaggerated what they had seen? Would that person then be less likely to admit the truth, because admitting the truth would expose their fibbery? These are questions that we have to ask when we're gauging the truthfulness and motivations of reports like the Enfield, Big Muddy, Murphysboro, and Pumphouse Monsters. And this wouldn't be a fully honest account if we did not mention that this isn't the first time that a town in central Illinois had been swept up in mass hysteria. 30 years earlier, just up the road, a mad gasser terrorized the tiny town of Mattoon, Illinois. This individual would allegedly sneak up to the window and shoot poison gas into women's bedrooms while they slept. No credible evidence of an actual gasser was ever found, and it was an instance that experts branded mass hysteria, or social contagion, in today's vernacular. Depending on which account you're talking about, a number of exotic pets could account for any of the sightings that are legitimate. The idea that a kangaroo could look like a monster with 3 legs when it's sitting in the dark with its tail in the tripod position is kinda plausible. And if the sightings of the Murphysboro Monster are accurate in describing an ape-like creature, That could also be someone's escaped exotic pet or an animal from a roadside zoo or attraction. Based on the research for this episode, one particular scenario seems likely. 2 days after Henry McDaniel's first sighting of the monster, he told a newspaper reporter that he was sure it wasn't a kangaroo because he used to have one as a pet when he served in the army in Australia. This would seem to be a startling admission for 2 reasons. First, it would seem to be an unsolicited denial. Henry McDaniel seemed to be saying, "No, it's not a kangaroo," before anyone was even saying it was a kangaroo. Whenever somebody denies doing something that you haven't accused them of yet, it should immediately raise a red flag. Second, Henry was openly admitting he had a fascination with kangaroos. Even so, this doesn't seem to be enough evidence to indict the memory of Henry McDaniel. Right? On July 28, 1973, the Moline Dispatch published another interview with Henry McDaniel, nearly 3 months after his initial report, and this time he offered more detail on his former pet kangaroo. He reiterated his description of the creature he saw, and continued to insist it was not a kangaroo when he stated, "I used to have one as a pet myself until I sold it to this fella that had an animal show." This again is revealing because McDaniel is admitting that he has some familiarity with the businesses of live animals and roadside zoos. So let's engage in some hypothetical thinking here. Henry McDaniel, an eccentric who apparently loved kangaroos and once had one as a pet, could have possibly come into the possession of a kangaroo that once belonged to an animal attraction run by Alan Yorkshire in Elyria, Ohio. Could he have stolen it? Possibly. Could he have unwittingly purchased the animal from another person who stole it? That's possible too. Continuing the hypothetical, McDaniel, a disabled veteran, loved having the kangaroo around for a couple of days, but quickly discovered that he would not be able to care for it or keep it hidden. Maybe it escaped from him, or maybe he turned it loose on purpose. But either way, he called the authorities for an altruistic purpose, to make sure the animal was taken care of. He called the authorities reporting a monster because it got their attention, thinking that they would show up, discover it was a kangaroo, capture the animal and send it to a zoo somewhere to live out its days in comfort. But that didn't happen. Instead, a whole generation of urban legends were spawned when other sightings followed. Folklore that's lasted 50 years so far. There's no evidence to support any of this conjecture, by the way. It's just a hypothetical. Henry McDaniel was never accused of anything more than being eccentric. However, he would be far from the first person to abandon an animal that he could no longer care for. In that scenario, the question of what exactly stalked Illinois in 1973 is something of a hybrid explanation between social contagion and the unknown. Most lend credence to the later sightings of the monster while discounting the original reports from McDaniel. It's quite possible that Henry's reports were bunk, and some of the later reports were actual sightings of an animal that was misidentified. On the McDaniel and WWKI Enfield reports, Western Illinois University's study concluded, in this area of southern Illinois, it is not unreasonable to assume Mr. M or the radio news team had actually seen an animal. People we interviewed framed the recent events in these terms. Their accounts admitted the possibility that large dogs, calves, bears, deer, and wildcats had been sighted. Some frames suggested that an exotic pet, such as an ape or a kangaroo, was the catalyst for the monster reports. Finally, some people tactfully suggested that Mr. M had a notoriously overactive imagination and had probably been shooting at shadows. In any event, we interviewed only one person who agreed with Mr. M's claim that he had indeed seen a monster from outer space. It would be easy to disregard the entire Enfield Monster summer of 1973 as baloney, based on the lack of credibility of the first report, but there are a couple of sticky facts. What did Randy Needham, Officer Nash, and Deputy Scott hear bellow at them on the night of June 25th? That was real, at least, whatever it was, and had nothing to do with Henry McDaniel. Also, remember earlier when I said, if Henry McDaniel's account of the monster was the first, your skepticism would be understandable? Would you be surprised to find out that he wasn't the first? In July of 1972, just on the other side of St. Louis, not even 3 hours away by car, residents of Pike County were on the lookout all summer for an ape-like creature that had been spotted in the area. One person reported it picked up the rear of his car by the bumper. Another eyewitness claimed to have seen the creature crossing the highway with either a dog or a sheep in its mouth. There is no question that people did, and still do, see things in the Heartland, for any number of reasons. But considering the age of this mystery and the simple curiosity of the question, it's quite likely that an explanation of the monsters in Illinois, unanswered since 1973, might remain forever unresolved.